continue with Unit 3 by looking at genetics and inheritance. So we're going to be talking about in this section, well, how do you inherit different genes? Genetics, genes, your heredity. What did you receive from your mom and dad? So taking a second to look at this little comic we have up here. Here you have Piglet, he's with a doctor, and it says, the bad news, Mr. Piglet, is that your stuttering is genetic. The good news is all that DNA testing helped us determine who your father is. So do you guys know who his father is? Do you know that cartoon character? So today, and throughout this unit, we are going to be talking about, okay, how do we figure out who someone's parent is? But what we're going to first start off with is, how do we know what traits we'll receive from our parents? So, we start off with the ultimate father of genetics. Who is this? Do you remember this? This is Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel was actually a monk who was the first to kind of study and name and begin to understand genetics. How do we receive our traits? So Gregor Mendel is known as the father of genetics. He actually started by studying pea plants because they were easy to observe and reproduce. He knew that the male part of the plant produced sperm, just like in animals, and that the female part produced the egg, again, just like in animals. He was able to join the two reproductive cells, the sperm and the egg of the plant, the pollen with the flower of the plant, and this is called flirt fertilization when they join together. We did look at this when we looked at mitosis and meiosis, and mainly meiosis. So then, we want to actually look at how the inheritance of those chromosomes come from parent to offspring. And so here again you have your female egg and your male sperm, and they're going to join together. When they join together, that's called fertilization, to form your zygote. In your notes, what you want to fill out is this top portion right here. Here you have egg from the mom and sperm from the dad. What is this process called that they have to go through to make those two? Well, that's for meiosis. And then you have fertilization when they join together. So here's egg, here's sperm being made through meiosis. And then when they join together, that's going to be called fertilization. And eventually, that zygote, that one single cell, will go through mitosis to form your offspring at the very end. So it goes through mitosis and development. So when we talk about the inheritance of chromosomes, we've mentioned chromosomes before, so we want to think about what are chromosomes. Well, chromosomes, remember, are just DNA that's twisted up or coiled up into a neater package, getting ready for meiosis. Chromosomes actually exist in pairs. I mentioned this before, that we get one from sperm, one from egg, so technically one from mom, maternal, and one from dad, paternal. And they actually those pairs are actually called homologous pairs. Homo means same. Homo means same. Okay? And when we talk about the same, we mean that these two chromosomes code for the same type of information. Code for same type of information, of info. Okay? So a section of DNA within a chromosome, a small chunk, notice how mine has kind of darker and lighter spots. Each of those different spots are going to be called a gene. And genes determine our traits, and that's what we looked at in our past unit. A trait is going to be anything that's physical or physiological. Physical could be something like our eye color. Physiological could be something like our blood type inside of your body. Here again, just a little reminder of you have DNA inside of your nucleus of your cell. That DNA is coiled up as a double helix, twisted around some proteins into a smaller, tighter package, and that's going to be your chromosomes. Okay, and you have 2 of each chromosome. So you end up having 46 total chromosomes, 23 pairs. So beside this image, let's write that down. 46 total, that's what we have in humans, 23 H homologous pairs. So write that underneath what we wrote earlier. So we all receive the same type of genes, but we can actually get different versions of that gene. And that's going to be called an allele. Allele. For example, alleles, here are our examples. An example could be something called hitchhiker's thumb. If you notice my thumb isn't as curved or as bent as this person's thumb. I have the allele for a straight thumb. My thumb's pretty straight. But this person's thumb is very much so curved, and this trait, or this allele, is called a hitchhiker's thumb. The trait itself is for our thumbs. How does our thumb look? And the 2 different alleles is hitchhiker's thumb and a straight thumb. You can actually express your alleles with letters. If you have a dominant allele, that's written as a capital letter. If you have a recessive allele, it's written with a lowercase letter. So we're just trying to figure out how can we write down this information. Well, hitchhiker's thumb turns out to be a dominant allele. So if a person had a hitchhiker's thumb, I'd actually put a big A for them. If I had a straight thumb like me, I would put a lowercase a. One thing that we need to keep in mind, and this is that empty line that you have at the bottom of your notes, is that a dominant gene actually masks or hides a recessive gene. So if you have a hitchhiker's thumb, you actually can end up having big A, because we always write those letters in 2s, or you can have big A, little a. Still have a hitchhiker's thumb, but you're covering up this straight thumb. We'll talk about what that means a little more. Notice though that some of the other traits that we have here could be things like a bent little finger. We'll talk about that in class if your middle pinky finger kind of bends or curves. Having attached or unattached earlobes at the very bottom, or being able to roll your tongue. Here we're showing you again the homologous chromosomes and actually the pairs of traits there, the alleles of the traits there, represented by the letters. Dominant, capital, recessive, lowercase. Then we have ways to describe these genotypes, or describe those letters as genotypes or phenotypes. A genotype describes the 2 alleles that you received from your mom and dad, so the actual letters itself. When you're describing those genotypes, if you describe it as homologous, that means you received identical copies, or you're purebred. So for example, big A, homologous dominant, little a, homologous recessive. Again, we'll talk about what this means a little more in class and give us more examples then. If you're heterozygous, this means you got 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele. So we're really here just describing what does it mean if you have these different types of letters. Okay? If you have 2 of the same letter, you're homologous, homo meaning the same. Zygous is referring to what your zygote got, what your sperm and egg gave you. And dominant is always a capital, recessive is always a lowercase. If you're heterozygous, sometimes they call this a hybrid, a mix. And you have a mix of both letters. So 2 people can have the same appearance, but actually have different genetics. Our previous example with hitchhiker's thumb, if you are homozygous dominant, big A, you'll have a hitchhiker's thumb. Not like mine, but the more bent one. But if you were heterozygous, a big A, little a, well remember that big A is dominant. It covers up that little a. So what you see is actually that the person has a hitchhiker's thumb. But later on they can pass on this little a to their child and give them a straight thumb. genotype, describing what alleles you received, and phenotype is actually going to describe how those alleles are portrayed or how you look physically. So I might have little a, homozygous recessive genes for my thumb, but my phenotype is that I have a straight thumb. Little a is my genotype. Straight thumb is my phenotype. And actually that's where we're going to stop at today for our notes. So please look back over the phenotypes and genotypes and figure out, do you have a straight thumb or do you have a hitchhiker's thumb? And what genotypes could you possibly have? And write that in your summary box. Again, do you have a straight thumb or a hitchhiker's thumb? Do you have a homozygous genotype or a heterozygous genotype? Is it dominant or recessive? Look back and see if you can figure that out and put that in your summary box.